Pinned beneath my needle, the Luna moth at first only trembled, its opal wings shivering against the velvet. I waited, as I'd been taught, as all apprentice collectors must, with patience, with reverence, and with a thumb pressing gently enough not to crush the thorax, but firm enough to remind the creature its flight was over. The wings, spread wide as a child's outstretched arms, bore the green of bruised apples and a shimmer like spun sugar. I counted down. With every tick, the filaments along its body quivered in diminishing protest until the final stillness arrived not as violence, but as surrender. It was then, in the hush, that she began to sing. The sound at first was so faint, so nearly a trick of my own tinnitus, that I ignored it. But the old rules held: lean close, listen, do not look away. In the hush of the parlor, it was the only noise. A lullaby, fractured and restitched from the threads of so many nursery nights. The wings whispered, and then, hush, hush, the world is sleeping. Even now, repeating it by rote, my mouth fills with the dust of longing. The moth's voice was not my mother's, yet in its cadence I heard the stumble of her foot on the stair, the knuckle of her lull against my closed door. I forced my hands to steady, even as behind me the collection cabinet hummed with 100 other songs, each one sealed behind glass, but never, not once silenced. I eased a pin through the thickest segment of the thorax, just above the heart, and felt the faintest flex as she tried to fold herself inward. The trick was to work quickly, pin the body, splay the wings, anchor the abdomen before the final pulse ceased. By the time my hand reached for the case, she was already a specimen, one more among the nocturnal choir I had assembled from the riverbanks, lamplit windows, mausoleum eaves. I left her to dry, marking the label in my neatest copperplate, Actius Luna, the 23rd of March, 1886. The cataloguing was meditative. I liked the repetition, the predictability, the sense of building an order out of so much fluttering wilderness. My mother once accused me of practicing a kind of necromancy, as if by preserving these wings I could reanimate the hours that had vanished. She was right, though I pretended otherwise. I told her it was science, that I was only a humble archivist of lepidoptera, that insects were incapable of magic. She only smiled, but said nothing more on the subject. Later that evening, the house gathered itself into its nightly chill. I padded into the study, where the glass cabinet occupied an entire wall, a reliquary of the dead, if dead things could shimmer so vibrantly. There were Cecropia and Polyphemus, each pinioned in mid-dream, their eye spots like 100 sleepless sentinels. There was my first capture, a battered death's head, whose somber mask had once terrified me into a week's worth of nightmares. I spent the longest time arranging its wings, refusing to close the cabinet until the symmetry was perfect. What mercy, I thought, that death had left it so unblemished. The other cases crowded in, each specimen labeled with its Latin name, date, and a single line of provenance: St. Mary's Churchyard, moonlit terrace, the hem of a widow's veil. The room was thick with the tang of camphor and old glue, undercut by the faintest scent of dandelion sap. If I held my breath and pressed my ear against the glass, I could hear the entire taxonomy humming, hundreds of voices, striated by color, ordered by genus. The most precious sang only in the dark. That night, my mother started her dying in earnest. I found her propped in the parlor wing chair, a shawl knotted at her throat, and her right hand pressed to the silk bandage at her breast. The air was viscous with laudanum and the sweet metallic rot of failing organs. She watched the blue flame in the lantern gutter, and without turning said, "You'll want to be awake tonight. The room is already filling." I knelt by her feet, as I had in childhood, but this time I did not beg her to stay. The house had learned to bow to gravity. When she slept, her breaths came in threes. When she woke, she looked past me, as if I was an after-image left on her retina from a brighter, more essential light. "Do you remember the green ones?" she asked. I nodded. Of course I remembered the green ones. She had caught them for me with her bare hands, once in the dusk-smudged orchard at the edge of the village. Even now I could picture her palms closing, gently, as if not to mar the powdery bloom. My mother set the memory between us, a hush of wings, and then cupped her hands over mine. "Don't wait too long this time," she whispered. Her fever broke at midnight. By 3, her lungs had gone to shallow tide. I sat at her bedside, tracing the faint flicker of pulse at her throat, and catalogued every shift in hue on her lips and eyelids, as if these would be the last changes the world would allow. I wondered which of the moths would arrive for her. I wondered if it would remember me. She died at dawn, which was a mercy. The moth emerged less than an hour later, pale and trembling, from behind the curtain I'd drawn against the sunlight. It was larger than the others, as if she'd poured her entire remaining substance into the vessel. The wings, when they first unfurled, were the color of antique glass, frosted, almost milky, and edged with the faintest rose. I did not want to touch it. I did not want to listen, but the old rules held. I steadied my hands and reached for the net. The moth flailed once, twice, then yielded. I slid it into a specimen jar, the lid already punched with air holes, and tried not to look at the trembling of its legs. I told myself I would wait until it was motionless before I dared to catalogue was compulsive. I set the glass on my desk, placed a sheet of black felt beneath it for contrast, and waited. The moth tested the boundaries with its antennae. each filament soft as breath, before settling into the corner nearest my left hand. I hesitated. What was the protocol for pinning your own mother? Her voice came as soon as I unscrewed the lid. Not a whimper or a goodbye, but a single, unbroken note that swelled until it was almost song. The others, those lesser moths, churchyard, riverbank, windowpane, had spoken only in scraps. This was a river in flood. I bent close, so close, the wings brushed my cheek. The fine powder clung to my skin, a ghostly blush, and the old ache of childhood, that desperate urge to be known, rose in me urgent and wild. The song was no lullaby, but a litany, a confession spun out between the beats of the moth's shuddering heart. I heard her secrets then, all of them, packed in the trembling body. The name of the man she'd loved before my father, the child she'd lost and buried in a garden plot 3 towns over. The way she'd envied my small cruelties and wished, sometimes, to be the one with the pins and not the wings. There was more, so much more. My father's voice, reedy with gin and regret, the sharp click of her own teeth against a lover's shoulder, the memory of her own mouth filling with moths, just once, when she was a girl and thought she could become something lighter, something that could fold itself inside a pocket and be carried away from home. The memory thrashed inside the jar, then collapsed into itself like a dying star. I blinked, and the moth was already half crumbled, the powder of its body scattered into the weave of the felt. They do not last, the green ones. It is their nature. After, I did not sleep. I did not eat. I opened the cabinet and ran my fingers along the cold seams of the glass, and the hum inside was almost unbearable. A riot of wings, a parliament of ghosts. Each moth wore its memory like an iridescent bruise, the fragments of other voices pressed between the panes. I did not want my mother to be among them, her litany on endless repeat, vibrating the air with the names of the lost. She deserved rest, more than the others, more than me. I took the specimen jar, still warm with the last of her song, and walked out into the garden, boots sinking in the thawed earth. The orchard was a skeleton of what it had been, the limbs bare and trembling. But I found the spot where the sun did not quite reach and set the jar at the base of the oldest tree. I waited. The moth inside was motionless, its wings folded neatly across its body. But I could tell from the way the powder shifted that it was not wholly dead. I unscrewed the lid.